Hello everyone and welcome back for some more Drag Race gossip, secrets and drama. So I'm back for another Have Your Say video where you get to vote on whether you agree with this week's Drag Race episode. And this video is for All Stars 9 episode 9. Today we're going to be recapping the episode, going through the results of the Have Your Say poll, and I'll be talking about some interesting tea that Mistress Isabelle Brooks shared in a recent video where she revealed some production secrets. All that and more coming up in today's video, so let's get started. Okay, so let's start by recapping the episode. So the queens come back into the workroom and it was the last time that the queens could use the ruby snippers, and Roxy chose to snip Angeria. Angeria comes back into the workroom and she doesn't seem to be that annoyed because she felt like she knew that Roxy was going to snip her because it was kind of an eye for an eye. The next day the queens come into the workroom and RuPaul tells them that the main challenge for this week is that it's going to be a rusical called Rosemary's Baby Shower the Rusical. So the queens get to work by choosing their roles, and as per usual they try and do this thing of showing that some people want a certain role and then they have to give it up because another queen wants it, but it's always difficult to tell whether they actually feel that way or if it's just played up for the camera. But the roles that they decide on are: Angeria takes the role of Ruth, Gottmik does Blair, Georges does Morgan, Nina West does Dr. Poltergeist, Plastique is Rosemary, Roxy is Pennywise, Chanel is Sydney, and then Vanessa Vanjie Mateo is Rosemary's Baby. Okay, so there's not much else to talk about apart from the fact the queens do the vocal recording and also the choreography, but there wasn't a huge amount to say about that. It's the usual making it look like some queens are struggling and other queens aren't. So let's move on to the actual rusical and I'll go through each role individually and give you my thoughts on it. Okay, so I'll talk about them in order in which they appeared. So I'll start with Chanel because she was the first one who had one of the biggest parts at the beginning and she was the character of Sydney. I thought Chanel did well given that I don't think her character necessarily had the most memorable lines. I thought she looked good and she played the part very well. However, I will say, compared to a lot of the other people in the rusical, I'm not sure whether it was that memorable, both because I think Chanel maybe was not quite as confident, but also because I don't think her role was actually as funny, the lines themselves, as a lot of the other queens. So I do feel like Chanel was at a little bit of a disadvantage in my personal opinion. And we'll get onto this a little bit later, but I was surprised that she was one of the top two in this challenge. Although I still think that all of the queens did a good job, including Chanel. The next person was Angeria in the role of Ruth. I feel as though Chanel and Angeria's characters were quite interlinked because they were both the kind of landladies. However, I do think that out of the two of them, Angeria's role was funnier. I also think that Angeria really leaned into the character and gave it lots of quirks and her typical Angeria movements and her facial expressions, and it made it really funny. And I do think that she did a lot with this role, but I do also think that her role was just actively funnier than Chanel's in terms of the lines and some of the characterizations. So the next person I'll talk about is Plastique, who played Rosemarie. Now, Plastique was arguably the main character of this, and I do feel as though she did a really good job given that she was in many of the scenes. I do think that she really brought something to the character. She did all of the choreography really well. And quite often as the main character, you don't always get the best lines because usually those are reserved for some of the side characters. But I do think that she did an amazing job in this role. She really nailed every single mannerism, every single dance routine that she had to do. So I do definitely think that Plastique slayed this role, and it was a very, very funny role. So the next person I'm going to talk about is Gottmik, who played the role of Blair. Now, this is obviously a spoof on the character from the movie The Exorcist, and I thought that Gottmik did a really good job in this. I thought the makeup and the hair and everything looked so good. It was such a good representation of that movie. Also, my favourite bit was the bit where the wig spun around. That was so funny, and I just really didn't expect that because I've never quite seen anything like that on Drag Race before. But also, Gottmik just did a really good job in my opinion. She's not necessarily known as being a dancer or anything like that, but even some of her moves, like when she got spun around by the dancers, was so good, and she landed every move, and I thought she really embodied this character extremely well. The next person we're going to talk about is Roxy as Pennywise. Now, this is obviously again a spoof on Pennywise from the movie It, the killer clown. The bit that really surprised me the most was how amazing that hair and makeup was. The fact that Roxy managed to transform herself like that and look so really hideously gory, but also scary and beautiful at the same time was so impressive. And to me, that was actually the best bit of the whole thing. She also did the dance routines amazingly, I thought, and really embodied with the voice and everything to make it such a scary role. But she also just looked really glamorous because her makeup and outfit was so good. And then the next person we're going to talk about in this trio was Georges as Morgan. Now, this is clearly a parody of the movie Megan, which is about a girl who gets given a robot doll to be her companion and friend. And there's this bit from the movie where Megan, the doll, does this kind of robotic dance and it went viral online. And I thought that Georges did such a good job of really embodying this character. It was so funny. Her movements were incredible. They looked so spot on to how it did in the movie Megan. Also, the outfit and the hair and the makeup made her look really robotic, which was obviously the point. And I thought that every single movement that Georges did was so calculated and good. It really did smash it out of the park, in my opinion. Okay, so next we're going to talk about Nina, who was in the role of Dr. Poltergeist. I thought Nina did a great job. She didn't necessarily have such a strong parody to go off of this in this role compared to some of the other people who were doing very clear parodies. But I thought she really embodied this character. It's not easy to be that type of character where you have to not have such a crazy outfit to really get yourself into the role. But I thought Nina did such an amazing job. As they said, you can really tell that she's been on Broadway and she's been in things like Hairspray, and you can definitely tell that she's used to performing and doing that kind of character. I was really surprised. I thought she was going to get a lot higher in the critiques than she did because I thought she really embodied this character and brought a lot of camp to that character as well. And then finally, we're going to talk about Vanjie as Rosemary's baby. I thought Vanjie did a really good job of this because she didn't come out until right at the end. Now, this can be either a benefit because it means that you are the final number and the final performance that there is in the piece, and it can work out well. But if you don't do that well, it means that you might be forgotten because you have less stage time. I think she looked great and I think she really embodied this character. And they obviously tried to make out as though she was going to sound bad because during the vocal taping, she didn't sound that good. But obviously there was a lot of auto-tune on it, but she still did really well. She really did all the movements and the dancing very well. So it was a good performance, but I do think that maybe compared to some of the others, I think the characterization maybe wasn't quite as strong in my opinion, but still a very, very good performance. Okay, so let's move on to the runway for this week, and the category was Bring Back My Pearls. And as usual, I won't give my opinion on the fashion because it's just not my thing. But I will say at the end who had my favourite outfit. Okay, so first up we had Plastique Tiara. And she said this is the birth of Venus and the birth of Plastique. And who runs the world? Pearls. So she said this is a Muglerized outfit that's drizzling down the runway. Then we had Angeria. Angeria said she loved this runway and she feels stunning and she's channeling all of her showgirl pageant energy. And she said you can't go wrong with pearls and they just look so glamorous, classy and sophisticated. Then we had Chanel, and she said her outfit is from the year 3000 on another planet. And she's just living her fantasy, and it's not always about glamour being beautiful, and instead she's just walking on the runway having fun, and this is a different vibe for Chanel. Then we had Gottmik, and she said this week she's serving black, pearl, demon, skeleton or ram-headed artistry down. Next we had Roxy Andrews, and she said she's the doll walking down the runway in her pearl glamorous outfit. And when she made this outfit, she was thinking of a flapper. And it's a reference to the old school Roxy, and she's been changing up her silhouettes, but she's very confident with her thick and juicy ass. Next up we had Georges, and she said she's looking so sickening stomping down the runway in this gold and pearl look with pearls in her hair. And she's showing leg and she feels like an unshucked oyster. And we all know the best way to enjoy an oyster is raw. Next we had Nina West, and she said this is a sci-fi Elizabethan celebration, and she wanted to create a kind of queen in her own kingdom. And finally, we had Vanessa Vanjie. And she said that she's giving you the Little Mermaid live action, but one of the sisters with the clam, or is it an oyster? But she said there's no more pearls left in Santee Alley, and she's going to tell you right now she cleared it out looking for these pearls for this outfit. I thought all of the outfits were amazing this week, but I will say my favourite is between Plastique and Angeria. I think I might have to give it to Angeria though. I just loved how clean the silhouette was, and it's very showgirls, but I just loved how simple it was, but also how elegant it was. And you could just tell that Angeria was absolutely loving herself in this outfit, and that confidence really sold the garment. But it was also just so intricately stoned, and the feathers also looked so expensive. But let me know in the comments which was your favourite outfit and why. So the top 2 of the week are announced, and it is Chanel and Georges. And the 2 of them lip sync to the song Love Come Home by Christine W. And it is actually a draw, and both of them win. And earlier in the episode, RuPaul had said that the winner gets to give a badge to someone else. And Georges chooses to give her badge to Chanel, and Chanel decides to give her badge to Georges. Okay, so now let's move on to the results of the Have Your Say poll. So question 1 was, who did the best in the Rusical? And with the majority of 42.5% was Georges, followed by Vanessa Vanjie Mateo with 19.5% and then Plastique with 12.6%. And I do agree, I thought Georges did absolutely amazing in this. She did the dancing so well, all of the movements were completely correct. The makeup and the outfit also was amazing, so I can definitely see why she was in the top this week. Second place was then Vanjie, and I do agree, I did think Vanjie did very well. I'm not sure I would have put her that high in the rank personally, because I think there were some other people that did a better job, but she did do very well, so I can see why. And also Plastique came in third place, which also I can see why, because she was the main character and she did extremely well. I really liked Roxy, who maybe got 4th position in this vote, so I probably would have put her slightly higher because I really loved the makeup and the characterization she did as Pennywise. So question 2 was, do you like Rusicals? And with a massive 88% was yes, with no only getting 12%. And I do agree, I do love Rusicals, they're one of my favourite challenges. I kind of wish they did them more often, but I can see why it's quite hard to do it. But I think the last few Rusicals on All Stars have been some of the best ones we've ever had. I really like it, and we'll get onto this in a minute, but I really like it when the queens do record the vocals themselves because I think it adds a different dimension. So overall, I really loved this Rusical. Everyone did a great job. And in general, Rusicals are just a really fun challenge as long as you get good writing and the songs are quite catchy. And I think in this particular instance, it had all of those elements. Question 3 was, what option do you prefer for a Rusical? And we had 77.9% for queens pre-recording the vocals, 14% for queens singing live, and then 8.1% for queens lip-syncing to a professional track done by a singer. And I do agree, I definitely prefer it when the queens either do it live or their own vocals. I do really like the live singing because I think some of the best musicals we've had have been on maybe the UK version where they usually always sing live. And although it does mean that if you're not a great singer, it can affect the overall quality of it, I think the fact that queens can sing live but also act and dance at the same time is such a massive skill to be able to have. So I really like it when they showcase that. But I do agree that my second position would be queens pre-recording their own vocals, because I find when the queens lip sync to a pre-recorded track by a singer, it's just a little bit boring because they're not really bringing that much of themselves to it other than their dancing. So I definitely prefer when the queens are in some way involved with the recording of their own vocals. Question 4 was, whose runway outfit was the best? And with 30.8% was Plastique Tiara, followed by Vanessa Vanjie Mateo with 26.6% and then Gottmik with 14%. And I do agree that Plastique looked absolutely stunning as always. In my vote, I did put Angeria higher just because I loved the outfit. I thought it was such an amazing outfit. But I can see why Plastique also got high on this vote because her outfit was stunning, but it was also very interesting and intricate. Vanessa also looked incredible, and so did Gottmik. I think everyone in this week did a really good job, so it was very hard to pick. Question 5 was, do you agree with the top 2? And interestingly, we had 70.1% for no and only 29.9% for yes. And I will have to unfortunately agree. I do think that the reason people said this probably is because of Chanel being in the top 2. Although I really like Chanel as a queen, she's one of my favourites. I do agree that I don't think she should have been in the top this week. I thought her characterisation was good, but the actual role itself was not that memorable. And I do feel like they wanted to give Chanel a badge because she hadn't won anything yet. But I just don't think that she was really in the top 2 this week, unfortunately. And I think that's probably an opinion that's shared by all of you because Chanel only got 5.6% in the first vote for who did the best in the Rusical. And I assume that's why most people said they did not agree with the top 2. Question 6 was, who won the lip sync in your opinion? And this was very close, with Georges getting 52.8 and Chanel getting 47.2. And I can see why. I don't think either of them necessarily did the most amazing lip sync. I think we've seen better ones so far this season. Although I will also say I thought the song maybe wasn't quite the right choice because it felt like it was a little bit mid-tempo, which I think is quite hard to perform to. But I will agree that I think Georges maybe did a slightly better job than Chanel, but I think it probably could have gone either way, to be honest. Question 7 was, who would you have gifted a badge to? And with the most amount was 61.2% for Chanel, followed by Vanessa Vanjie Mateo with 14.8, and then Gottmik with 8.3. And I definitely agree that I would have also given the badge to Chanel just because at that time, up until now, she hasn't had a badge so far. And I think that arguably she should have got a badge for maybe some of the other performances in the other challenges. So I do think I would have given it to Chanel. And then the other person I would have given it to maybe would have been either Vanessa but also Nina. I think either of those two also have been doing extremely well and maybe haven't been given the props that they deserved in some of the other challenges. So I would have given my badge to them. And then finally was question 8, which was, who is the front runner so far, or in other words, most likely to win the competition? And with 37.9% was Roxy Andrews, followed by Plastique Tiara with 38.4%, and then Angeria with 18.4%. And I definitely agree. I think Roxy, Plastique and Angeria definitely are going to be the top 3. I'm not sure in what order it's going to be in terms of the top 2. Probably most likely between Roxy and Plastique, I would imagine, just because they're some of the ones with the highest number of badges and they've also done well every single week. They've not really had necessarily a bad week. But I also think Angeria could also be a really high contender for this. So it will be interesting to see who ends up in the top 2. Okay, so let's move on to the comments for this week. And my Patreon member Ashley said, I like the musical challenges as well. This one in particular was really good. And my Patreon member Stephen shared this opinion and said, this is one of the best musicals ever. I really thought it would be Georges, Roxy or Nina based on the challenge. Chanel did have an amazing runway though, and she gave a performance that I think reads much better in person. The expressions and everything are very good in a live stage performance. TV cameras and angles tend to make certain things read differently, which I think negatively impacts some of the viewers' perceptions of the queens. I definitely agree. I really loved this musical. I thought it was definitely one of the better ones we've had. All of the songs were really catchy and I think every single queen did a great job. I did think this was a very interesting point that Stephen made about the different camera angles and how it can come across different on TV than it did in person. And I think we have to remember that the queens usually shoot these things multiple times, at least twice. And quite often they will choose the best take from those two, or in other times they might choose the worst take if they want to try and make a queen look worse than they were. We've heard multiple queens before say they did it better in one of the rehearsals, but they used the bad rehearsal in the edit. So I do think that's something that we do need to think about and take into consideration. My Patreon member Kerry also said, this was my favourite musical. I do think Chanel and Plastique were at the top because they were in every scene. Georges had the best dance review. I did not recognise Roxy, so good. And I do agree that I think someone like Chanel and Plastique, because they were in so many of the scenes, you do have to give them props because they had so many lines and so much choreography to learn. compared to maybe someone like Vanjie who came in right at the end. And this was definitely a great rusical. I think there have been other ones that maybe I preferred the music slightly more, but this one was still a very good, and it probably was maybe the most consistent in terms of every single person did a great job. And my Patreon member Gardy said, "The girls turned it out for this performance. Everyone was amazing, and this is one of the best rusicals the show has done. Glad that Nina and Georges gave each other badges. Evens the playing field a bit." And this is a really good point, although I do think Gardy meant Chanel and Georges giving each other badges, not Nina, because Nina didn't win. But I did really like this because it definitely did bring up the scores a little bit and even it out, because now Chanel has 2 badges and Georges has 3. And I think that does make a difference to the total now. And it did seem a little bit unfair that Chanel had none. So I liked that they did that, although it did obviously feel maybe a tiny bit predictable. And moving on to some of the comments from the Have Your Say poll, a lot of you said that this was in your top 3 rusicals in herstory, and other people said best rusical ever. And I do agree, as I said, that this was an amazing rusical, and although the music maybe wasn't quite as great as some others that we've seen, I personally really liked the fact that it was very consistent and each queen did a great job. There were quite a few comments of people saying that they thought that Chanel should not have won that challenge and that she got a badge out of pity. Now, I don't agree that it was a pity badge. I think that's a little bit harsh. I do really like Chanel, and I think there were other challenges where she should have been in the top 2 or at least high, and she didn't. So I can see why she's getting a badge, because I think she's a great competitor. It's just in this particular week, I will have to agree that I don't think that she was in the top 2, unfortunately. But that was also down to the fact that I think the lines that she was given and the character that she was given was just not as memorable as some of the others. Someone also made the point that pre-recorded vocals allow for the most clean presentation, while live vocals are more entertaining. And this is definitely a very fair point. I can see why they do the pre-recorded, because it means that the queens don't have to actually do live vocals, and obviously that's very difficult when you're trying to move and everything. And also you can auto-tune it for some people who maybe don't have the best voice. But I will say that some of the rusicals that we've seen live, for example, something like Rats from UK Season 2, is one of my favourites, not just because I don't think everyone necessarily is a great singer, but I think you do get such a great vibe that the queens can do all of those things, singing, dancing and acting at the same time. And even if you're not the best singer, it's still such an amazing natural ability to be able to do all of that, that I think that's in a lot of ways more impressive than if you just pre-record and auto-tune your vocals. And quite a few people brought up that Nina did really well and they kind of glossed over it. And I did say this earlier, I do think that Nina did an incredible job, and I was a little bit surprised. I don't think that the judges quite gave her the props that she needed for that role, and I also feel like maybe she should have been slightly higher in the ranking. She may have even been top 2 material, because I do think she had one of the more bland characters in a way, but I think she managed to really ham it up and do a lot with that character and make it really interesting. But let me know in the comments what you thought and who you thought was the best role. Okay, so now we're going to move on to some interesting backstage tea that Mistress Isabelle Brooks spilled in a recent video. As some of you know, Mistress competed on season 15, and she started her own YouTube account several months ago, which has been very successful. She's posted a variety of videos, but her most recent video, titled "Everything I Stole from the Set of RuPaul's Drag Race," shared some interesting behind the scenes tea about her time on the show, as well as some production secrets. So Mistress started off by saying that she cut out a piece of the pink fabric brick wall from the workroom, which she showed on camera. And she also apparently cut out a much larger piece of the wall, and the producers caught her and were really mad about it. And we've heard before that many queens have also done this too, not just season 15 but other queens too. So it would be interesting to know if there are just giant holes in the workroom wall now, or have they replaced the wall since then? Mistress then said that she stole the paddle of her face that they used in the mini challenge in episode 13. And the reason she stole it was because she realised that the paddles had their entrance look photos on them, and she wanted to be able to show her friends when she left the show what her entrance looked like before it aired on TV. So Mistress apparently encouraged all the queens to steal their own paddles so that the producers may not notice, but they did, and they got in a lot of trouble for it and had to give them back. but Mistress found the paddles later on and took them when no one was looking. Then later in the video, Mistress revealed that she stole the entire script for the Wig Loose Rusical challenge in episode 12, which was a big no-no. And this part of the video went a bit viral, and someone posted about it on Reddit, saying that because the names were printed on the script, they think that the roles for the Rusicals are predetermined and that the queens don't actually get to choose their roles. However, in the comments, most people seem to agree that the script was likely changed after the queens chose their roles, and the names of the queens were written in after the fact. However, this did start an interesting debate about this topic, with some people saying they don't think Drag Race would have enough time to retype the script on set. Or that maybe that's why they were angry that Mistress stole the script, because it was revealing production secrets that the roles are pre-assigned and that the queens choosing their roles is all fake. However, as I said before, most people agree that this was just a funny conspiracy theory and is likely not true. Mistress also shared another bit of tea from the Wig Loose episode, which was that during the Rusical, they held up a copy of RuPaul's book, Guru, and the book was personally signed by RuPaul, and Mistress decided to steal it. However, the producers later came and were looking for the book, and they asked Mistress to give it back because they knew that it was likely to be her that stole it. The issue was that this book was a personal copy of the book that RuPaul had signed for Theron Smothers, who is one of the co-executive producers of Drag Race and is very high up at World of Wonder. And apparently Theron was really angry that his signed copy of the book had gone missing. According to Mistress, the producers asked her if she had the book and she lied and said no. And they told the queens that they would leave the room and whoever stole the book should just put it back on the table before they come back. And as long as they did that, there would be no repercussions. Mistress said that the other queens just told her to put the book back because they knew that she had stolen it. Mistress just picked up the book from the shelf and said, quote, "Oh my god, is this what y'all are looking for?" And the other queens just apparently shook their heads and none of them laughed, and they were all silent on the ride back to the hotel that evening. Mistress then shared that, as we all know, they film multiple outcomes of the queens getting into the final four, and that includes the queens having to film fake eliminations. Mistress said that everyone knew that she wasn't going to be eliminated, presumably because she had been doing so well in the competition, but the queens still had to write, quote, fake letters for Mistress's elimination, and Mistress showed the letter that Sasha Colby wrote for her as well as some others. And finally, Mistress said that her favourite thing she stole from set was this piece of paper that showed all of the queens' names and photos in and out of drag. Mistress said she saw this on one of the security guards' desks during filming, and she stole it because it revealed who all of the queens were on the season, which is of course a closely guarded secret. And we all know that they have this type of information sheet on Drag Race with the queens' photos and names, because other queens have revealed this in the past. Such as, for example, Willem, who said that on season 4, one of the producers didn't know the queens' names even though they had a sheet like this, and they kept calling Latrice La something. But it's just interesting to actually see what these sheets look like, as well as the images that they chose of the queens to use on this sheet. Mistress also revealed that after they were finished filming and before the show aired, Mistress met up with her drag mom at the Cheesecake Factory, which is a restaurant chain. And Mistress took this piece of paper with her so that she could show her drag mom who the cast were for season 15. But when Mistress got home, she realised that she had left this piece of paper at the restaurant, and she was really worried because if anyone found it, it would have leaked who was on the season, and Mistress would have got in huge trouble. So Mistress went back to the restaurant, and luckily the piece of paper was still there and no one had taken it. But I just thought this was interesting because Mistress may have almost accidentally leaked the cast for season 15 if anyone had found this piece of paper. And this video was an interesting insight into how production works on the show, and also some interesting backstage tea that we've not seen before. Mistress also shared a lot of other interesting things that she stole from the set of Drag Race in the video too. So make sure you go and watch the full video on Mistress's channel, and I'll put a link to it in the description. So there you go, there was the Have Your Say video video for All Stars 9 episode 9. Do you think that this was the best Rusical in Drag Race history? And if not, which Rusical is your favourite? Let me know in the comments. And if you'd like to get early access to my videos as well as have your comments featured in my Have Your Say videos, please check out my Patreon and consider supporting me. It goes such a long way to helping support my channel and I really appreciate it. And I'll put a link to my Patreon in the description. I'd also like to say a massive thank you to all of my Patreon members who are amazing and support me every month. Thank you so much for being part of my Patreon. I really appreciate it and I really do love my Patreon community. You are all legends. If you liked this video, please remember to like and comment on the video to help tell the algorithm that this is a great video, and make sure you hit the subscribe button because it really does make such a big difference to my channel. Thank you for watching and I hope you'll join me again in future videos. Thank you, bye!